When we look at the physical ruins of modern nations across the Middle East, it is easy to blame foreign invasions or proxy wars. But the collapse of these societies often started entirely from within. Across the region, long-standing governments and established leaders were violently overthrown by their own radicalized citizens. Ordinary people turned into extremists, willing to tear their own countries apart. Now, look at the digital battlegrounds right here in Malaysia and the wider Nusantara region. If you spend time on social media, you have likely seen a rising tide of aggressive comments from young users, rapidly tossing around accusations of bid'ah and kafir. We tend to brush this off. We assume these fierce online arguments over local traditions, like reciting tahlil, or abstract theological frameworks like Tawhid 3 versus Sifat 20, are harmless differences of opinion. But treating them as harmless ignores a lethal historical pattern. These seemingly trivial online attacks are the early, diagnostic symptoms of the exact same ideological virus that fractured societies in Libya, Syria, and Iraq. This pattern of digital aggression marks the reemergence of an ancient civilizational threat, the Neo-Khawarij. To understand how this virus operates, we have to travel back to the 7th century, during the era of Caliph Ali bin Abi Talib. This is where the original hosts of this ideology emerged, a faction known as the Khawarij. Curious. To the average observer, the Khawarij appeared incredibly pious. They fasted constantly, prayed through the night, and recited the Quran with total devotion. Their outward behavior was so extreme, it could easily make ordinary Muslims feel inadequate. Yet they harbored a fatal flaw. They possessed a severely rigid, literalist mindset. They read religious texts without context, explicitly rejecting the nuanced interpretations of established scholars and the companions of the Prophet. This absolute literalism led to their signature tactic, Takfir. By their logic, anyone who disagreed with their specific interpretation was entirely outside the fold of Islam, an apostate. By branding fellow Muslims as apostates, the Khawarij justified shedding their blood. Caliph Ali's forces physically defeated the Khawarij army on the battlefield. However, their core ideological formula, taking literalist texts, mixing in religious exclusivity, and using that to justify violence, survived in the shadows. Fast forward to the 18th century in the Arabian Peninsula, where this dormant ideology found a new host. A movement emerged claiming to purify Islam, known today as the Wahhabi or Salafi movement. While claiming to return to the pure practices of early Muslims, this movement aggressively rejected centuries of traditional Islamic scholarship. They dismissed established legal schools, the madhabs, and the spiritual sciences of tasawwuf, effectively mirroring the old Khawarij mindset. For a long time, this remained a highly localized regional ideology. But in the 20th century, fueled by vast reserves of petrodollars and strong institutional academic backing, it was mass exported across the globe. Today, this neo-Khawarij ideology uses a highly effective 3-step pipeline to radicalize communities. Step 1 is labeling local practices as bid'ah, or forbidden innovation. By attacking deeply held local traditions, they create an initial wedge, separating the youth from their elders. That wedge leads directly to Step 2, isolation. They condition their followers to view traditional, older scholars, the Kaum Tua, as deviant or ignorant. By severing the community from its established intellectual roots, they ensure their own voices are the only ones left to trust. Finally, we reach Step 3, takfir and violence. Once an individual is isolated from their community and convinced they alone hold the ultimate truth, it takes very little to push them to view their own government and fellow citizens as enemies of God. This is the mechanism that generates domestic terrorism. Logic used to justify online takfir is the same psychological architecture that supports physical insurrection. By following this 3-step progression, we see how small, isolated theological arguments eventually provide the foundation for total civil collapse. The Prophet Muhammad explicitly warned us about this phenomenon. He spoke of a future generation of young people who would recite the Quran beautifully, but noted their reading will not go beyond their throats. They would possess the text, but lack any deep comprehension of its spirit. The warning continues, stating these extremists will pass through the religion exactly like an arrow passes straight through its target, entering one side and exiting the other, leaving the substance of faith entirely behind. Fortunately, the Nusantara region has an established immunological shield against this virus. Our defense lies in the traditional Ali Sunnah wal Jama'ah framework, protected and overseen by our constitutional monarchy system, which maintains religious stability. Traditional Islamic learning neutralizes extreme literalism by demanding a verifiable chain of transmission, known as sanad, for any scholarly claim. Frameworks like Sifat 20 force students to use logic and deep theological reasoning, effectively short-circuiting the shallow literalist trap. If you are a young person exploring your faith, be incredibly cautious. Do not be seduced by loud, confident rhetoric, even when it is masked behind high academic titles. If a speaker's primary goal seems to be dividing the community or mocking your elders, they are feeding you poison. The strongest defense against extremism is intellectual humility. Recognize the limits of reading translated texts on a screen, and actively seek out knowledge from verified traditional teachers who emphasize unity and deep understanding. Guarding traditional theology serves as a vital national security imperative, the only immunological barrier capable of keeping a society from dismantling itself from within.